Suzanne Keel is a high school teacher at Sandy Valley High School. So tonight must be Sandy Valley night, I guess. Doing a lot of cool things. And she presented last summer at our High Impact Conference. And maybe some of you went to her sessions. And if you didn't, you missed. It was really good. And afterwards, we talked and she agreed to present. And Suzanne, before you start, I'm going to answer Michelle's. The author or publisher of Hands-On Grammar is Catherine McKnight. So that's the name you want to look for. Okay, Suzanne, are you there still?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and then you can share your screen. Is that okay?
Yes, I will. And I'm also kind of a beginner at doing, especially the presentations. I'm used to just sitting on Google Meet. So I hope you guys will bear with me here. So, okay.
Like I said, we need some theme music or something while we always have to wait. There you go. It's coming.
Can you see it? I can't see anything else but what I'm presenting. So
okay,
I can't see anybody's faces.
Are you okay, Suzanne, then if something comes up in the chat box, I interrupt and I'll
please.
Get questions? Okay.
Yeah, please, because I'm not sure how to present it without doing full screen. So
okay.
Yeah, oops, sorry. Yeah, see, there you go. I don't know what I'm doing.
That's all right. I use two computers. That's the only way I can make it work. So
okay. First of all, before I even start, I want to just give a quick little shout out to Kristen Woods because she is incredible. She was my daughter's kindergarten teacher, actually, her first year teaching, and she was awesome then. So like, it's just awesome what your students did. And we're really lucky to have you at Sandy Valley. So you're fantastic. So I just wanted to say that. So I appreciate, Diane, thank you for asking me to talk to you guys today. I don't have actually an endorsement in Gifted. I don't have like a certificate or anything, but I have been working with gifted and talented students, especially writers, for the entire 20 years that I've been teaching. So over those years, I have learned some things about how to help even very good writers become even better. My hope is that by the end of the time I'm presenting here, you guys are going to have a sense of what kinds of challenges that we might have in teaching writing to gifted students. And you might even have other ones that I hadn't come up with. So if you do, please, share those. And I'm sure that's something we can talk about. Also, I want to be able to show you guys how we can address those challenges, and then specifically how self-evaluation as a technique can be used as a tool to help stretch those gifted students. So the first thing I thought I would just talk about is some of the challenges that I have noticed over the years dealing with and teaching gifted and talented writers. So first of all, I encounter a lot of these student mindsets pretty often. And the first one is like, my writing is great. I'm such a fantastic writer. You really don't have anything to teach me. I don't really need to revise my writing. And sometimes that happens because earlier, the years before, they've been told their writing is good and their writing is good. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be better. So I encounter that. Then the next thing I encounter pretty often is this idea of like, the only reason they want to revise is just figure out how I can get my points back. I don't really care about the piece of writing or the quality so much as making sure I can get as close to 100 points as I possibly can because I want 100%. The other challenge that I have with gifted or talented writers is they sometimes will hold themselves back because they're so worried about their grade and they're so worried about being correct and doing something right. And they're afraid to take risks because they're afraid that might negatively affect their grade. And so those are some things that I've noticed dealing with the students. I think too, just as a teacher, I've had some mindsets too that I think have not really been beneficial when I've been teaching gifted students. And one of those is accepting grade level standards as good enough. And I teach primarily 10th grade, and I've been teaching a tested subject the entire time I've been teaching. And so, when we have those writing tests, if the students can do what they're supposed to do on that on-demand writing situation, that sometimes it's easy to like, okay, then we're going to move on and do something else because you've got that. But if we are truly supposed to be stretching and growing these writers, that we need to go ahead and stretch them beyond what their grade level says they should be doing. I think sometimes another mindset that we can fall into is focusing on the qualitative elements of writing. And what I mean by that is maybe sticking really, really closely to a rubric, checking the boxes, focusing on things that are easy to put numbers to, like run-on sentences. I'm taking off a point for every run-on sentences or every comma error, because I know that I've been challenged in the past with gifted students who want to know, like, why did you take 3 points off? Why are 3 points off of that assignment? And it's easy to be like, okay, well, you had 3 run-on sentences, that's -3 points. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really help them become better writers. So just reflecting on my own experiences, those were some of the things I came up with. So I decided to do a little bit of research and see what was already out there about teaching gifted writers. And it was interesting. There's not really a lot that's out there. I found 2 studies that both had focused on elementary school students. And so the first one, this study by Mary Helen Freeman, Improving Writing Skills for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade gifted students through the use of developmental processes. I think it was actually her dissertation even. She basically, her study was doing a writing workshop approach with these gifted students based on the work of Lucy Calkins. And she had identified 9 writing objectives, and she wanted to see how that developmental approach would result in improvement in their writing. And she found that indeed, using that process approach, the developmental approach, did help them meet or exceed the expected growth in 9 different writing objectives. And those ranged everything from like the students' attitudes toward writing all the way through, the mechanical and the grammar stuff. The other article that I found that I thought was interesting was called Goals and Feedback During Writing Strategy Instruction with Gifted Students. And these gentlemen did a study, and I can't remember what the grade level, but it was elementary school again. And they gave students targeted learning goals. Some students got more specific goals than others. So there was a group of students that got very specific goals, a group of students that got kind of general goals. And then they also varied the amount of feedback that students would get on their progress toward those goals. And they found at the end of the day that the more specific and targeted the learning goals were, and the more feedback that students got, the more that they achieved and the more that they grew as writers. So I think we can take from those pieces of literature some implications for our classroom. And one of those is that I think we should be using writing process approaches even with our gifted students to help them improve their writing skills. We saw from the Freeman article too that ownership of the writing, which was a result of using that developmental process, did result in increased effort and increased engagement. And then consequently, that resulted in better achievement of the student writing. The other article shows us about the importance of targeted goal setting. And I think sometimes that's something we can overlook, and not think about specifically giving students targeted goals to work toward with their writing. And then the feedback piece, just reminding us how important that is, which we know. However, I know looking at that, you guys are probably thinking like, oh my God, more feedback. Like I can't grade everything I have. But hopefully the strategy I'm going to talk about today with this self-evaluation will help show you how we can get students feedback and good quality feedback without like adding work to our own plate. So, and like, I'm all about that. So hopefully that will help. So a couple ways that the literature specifically addresses those challenges. I thought it might be nice to kind of see how those connect. So that idea of like my writing being great and I'm only going to revise for points and I just want to make sure everything's correct. That process approach, if we do that, that emphasizes not only the concept of ownership, but also challenges to improve their writing, even if it's already good. So those kinds of things will help the students feel that more ownership toward their writing. If we do a process approach instead of a product approach, it allows students to take risks with their writing, because then the revisions don't hurt their grade. It doesn't matter if you have to redo it. If you try and fail, it's okay. And I don't know about you guys, but I found like working with those gifted students, like, oh my gosh, they're so afraid of failure, to the point where like they have such high anxiety and stuff. I feel so sorry for them that like I want to tell them like it's okay to fail. So process approach really addresses that. Also, the goal setting can help, because it shows students that even if their writing is good, that they can come up with another goal, or we can give them another goal that takes them to that next level. And then it also gives them that authentic reason to revise. And it's not about points, but it's about, I'm trying to meet this goal. I think the literature also addresses those teacher mindsets, because it reminds us that we should emphasize growth over achievement, and that it reminds us too, I think, that the gifted students need to move through the process. And this probably, I'm going to guess this isn't as much of an issue for elementary and maybe even middle school teachers, but I know as they get into high school, we tend to spend less time in class having students actually work on their writing, especially if they're good writers. We give them the assignment, they do their assignment out of class, they turn in their assignment. And so the message there is that the process is not really necessarily all that important. So I think the literature reminds us that it's okay, and in fact beneficial for students to take time to go through the writing process with them. Even though they're already good writers, they can benefit from that process. So just kind of in summary, some ways to stretch gifted writers generally. One of them, obviously pushing beyond those grade level expectations, looking to see what they're expecting at that next level. Encourage writing in other genres. So our writing standards have us teaching narrative writing, expository writing, and persuasive or argumentative writing, depending on the grade level. But Standard 4 also says that students should be writing for a variety of audiences and purposes. And I know, especially me being in a tested subject area, it's tempting to just over and over and over and over again keep doing essay, 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 essay. And sometimes teachers drop out the narratives, and don't give students the opportunity to write different kinds of writing that is more geared toward like the kinds of writing people do in real life. And so especially if they're already pretty good essay writers, that would be a great way to stretch them so that they can see how to write in those other genres. Another way I think to stretch them is to promote that sense of autonomy and ownership with their writing. If they feel like they're in charge of their writing and it's theirs, they're going to have that intrinsic motivation to become better writers too. Opportunities for meaningful feedback is another way to stretch them, because the more feedback they get, the more authentic those revisions are going to be. And I put on there encourage and reward authentic revision, but maybe even requiring revision. I know I've kind of had to go to that with some of the classes. Although, again, because of the grades, my honor students are generally more willing to actually revise than, maybe my regular kids are. But not all of them will. So. And then finally, the last way I think that we could stretch gifted writers is considering process grading over product grading. So instead of saying like, oh, your grade is based on how your essay product looks against the rubric, your grade is based on how much growth that your writing shows from draft 1 to final copy. And so it's a little bit of a shift of a mindset there, that growth mindset over the, product mindset. So I think that can help them grow too and encourage them to grow. So any questions so far? Is everybody following me? I can't see people's faces, so I can't read if people are with me or not.
The only thing I see, Suzanne, it's Denise Cooley said narrative is so important for growing voice and poetry as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. Narrative gets such a bad rap and people think that it's not important, but yeah, she's absolutely right. Like narrative writing is essential. And actually I teach the CCP college writing 1 and 2, and we do narrative in college writing. And sometimes if students, depending on how they come to me, if they've come through my class, I always do narrative, but sometimes they come to me and they haven't done a narrative since like 5th or 6th grade, and they really just don't know how to do it. But narrative is really sort of like the base for all other kinds of writing. you can build off of what you learn in narrative to improve your expository and argumentative writing as well. So yeah, I agree. It's totally important. So I was sad that it kind of I feel like it sort of has gotten pushed to the back burner, but yeah. So, okay. Are we ready? Should I keep going?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let me talk a little bit about self-critiquing as a strategy specifically for stretching gifted and talented writers. So when I talk about self-critique, just to be clear about what I mean, and I actually use the term self-critique and self-evaluation interchangeably. Some people differentiate between the two based on when it happens in the process. But anytime I say self-critique or self-evaluation, I'm referring to the practice of students thinking about and evaluating and responding to their own writing using a set of criteria and for a specific purpose. So a couple benefits just before I get started. Self-critiquing helps promote ownership and autonomy of their writing, independence. Self-critiquing helps connect students to those targeted goals, helps provide them feedback. It helps for more productive peer critiquing and also then for meaningful revision. So let me talk just briefly about each of those benefits. So to get a little bit theoretical on you guys for a second. So the first benefit of self-critiquing is that it does encourage that sense of ownership. Going back to some of those well-known scholars in the field of composition studies like Donald Murray and Linda Flower and Peter Elbow, they all argue that for students to be effective writers, they've got to have this sense of ownership of their own writing. And they argue that they talk about how when students are writing, they're basically having a conversation with themselves in their own head about what they're doing. And they do that throughout the process. But not all of our students are aware that they're even having this conversation with themselves and that they're making decisions as they're going and as they're writing. So when we stop and ask students to self-critique, what we're doing is creating cognitive awareness about those conversations they're having and about the decisions that they're making. What that does is increase their awareness of those internal conversations. So I think I just said that. I think I just repeated myself. So they make those deliberate decisions. And then that process of doing that, when they're aware of their thinking and they're aware of the decisions they're making, that builds what these scholars call working memory. And working memory is that body of knowledge that students have about what makes a good piece of writing and how to get there. What are the processes and the strategies and all that kind of stuff. So when students have more working memory, and I think I have this, yeah, so they have this internal dialogue that helps them to reflect on the decisions that they've made, which helps them then make more decisions about what to do next. And so as a whole process, what this looks like is students will focus on specific qualities of writing with their self-critique. That helps them to build that conceptual understanding of those abstract writing concepts, like development, say. When they're understanding those abstract concepts better, that is increasing that working memory so that they can evaluate their own work better, and then have more productive internal dialogue. And all of those things help to build that sense of ownership and self-regulation because they're making the decisions and they're making the judgments about their own writing and then deciding to improve their own writing. And all of this, they're doing it on their own because they want to and they've made the decisions. And so that's how this process works as a way to improve that ownership and autonomy. So another benefit of self-critiquing is that it does encourage that meaningful revision in students. And if you think about it, a lot of times, like, we are still at the center of the whole process. So we want students to revise, but we've given them the feedback. And so we gave them the assignment, we give them the feedback. And then students, a lot of times, will just turn that into an exercise of checking the boxes. I'm just going to fix everything they said so I can get those points back. But when the students are self-critiquing, we take a step back and we're removing ourselves from that equation a little bit because the students have to make the judgments. And so what they're going to change is going to be to please themselves and for a deliberate reason other than the teacher told me to do it. So it builds that intrinsic motivation that they need so that they can just become better writers in the long run. Couple other practical benefits of self-critiquing. It reinforces that writing is a process, especially for our one and done kids. If you know what I mean by that, like I have them, a lot of them in my class where they're like, oh, I just write one draft and it's fine. And I want to teach them like, no, like in the real world, writers don't write one draft, because at some point in their education, that is not going to work for them anymore. So it reinforces that idea. It also makes sure that students understand the assignment's requirements, because sometimes even honor students will misread assignments. And so it makes them pause and make sure that they're understanding what they're supposed to be doing. It also does help improve their understanding of domain-specific vocabulary, like words like coherence and development and unity and all those kinds of words. And then another benefit is that it can help students prepare for effective peer critiques. If any of you guys have done peer critiquing in the classroom, and that's a really difficult thing, and kids don't know what to say to each other. But I found if they self-critique first, they are bringing something to the table when they peer critique then, and those are more productive. And then finally, it can help them create a concrete revision plan, like where am I going to go with this piece of writing? There are sometimes problems with self-critiquing. The first one being poor understanding of the task. If students have never really done this before, a lot of times they just don't know what to do, but we can train them how to do it. I'm going to kind of walk through that. So that can definitely be, kind of like checked off. We can deal with that. As far as analyzing text, most of our students are not going to have trouble analyzing text. That's not going to be their issue. But the lack of psychological distance often is. A lot of times ego gets in the way. They're good writers. They believe they're good writers. And so they resist being told that anything can be changed in their writing, or they resist changing it once they've put it on paper. So that's, at least I've had those experiences pretty often with students in the past. So those can be some barriers that we need to overcome. All right, so here's some nitty gritty now. Like here's the how and when, the practical stuff. So like here's the best stuff, I think. All right, so this is the first example of a teacher-centered self-critique. And this is the method I like to use when I first begin training students how to self-critique. And a lot of you guys have probably used this strategy. The strategy of highlighting is not really a new strategy, but to use it as a technique to intentionally self-evaluate might be a little different way of using it in the past. You can see my example here. It's an example of, we were looking at a comparison contrast essay, and this one paragraph, we highlighted all these different elements of the paragraph, the topic sentences and the context for the quotes and the text evidence, the explanation, transitional words. So here's how I would do this whole method. So we would generally read and analyze a model essay. And we would go over and we highlight that model essay on that first read. Look, here are all the pieces and all the parts of that essay. Students then will do their pre-writing, they'll do their draft. And then for the self-critique, they do that step 3. I give them a set of instructions based on what we did to the model. And now they do that to their own writing and they highlight it up. From there, they can take what they've learned about their essay and take it to peer critique to sort of get another opinion, which, you can do that step, or you can have them just take that highlighting and go straight from there to the revision plan. So, and it's interesting, I found like, especially my stronger writers, they want to do a revision before they let their peers take a look at their work. So they like to do the highlight, and then they're like, oh, like give us another day to revise before we can go ahead and peer critique. I don't want anyone to look at this yet. So, which I love that. I think that's kind of cool when they're the ones asking for time to revise. So this is an example. What you're looking at now is an example of the instructions, and it does look, I admit, it looks really overwhelming. My honors kids do fine with it. When I'm working with other students, like struggling students, or just like writers that are on grade level, a lot of times I'll break this up because it can look overwhelming. So, but what students can do after their draft is done is follow these directions to highlight everything that their essay is supposed to have. And then I actually, for the first time, I also then give them, okay, so if you're missing the red highlight, go back and revise your topic sentences to echo the thesis. If you're missing the yellow highlights, that would be for evidence. They've got to go back and, make sure they're adding that evidence. So this gives them a little direction as to, based on what you're seeing, what should you do with your paper? Couple options. Sometimes I'll have the class work together through that guide. And when it says see samples in the folder, that was the folder that I had shared for that high impact conference. So sometimes I'll give them the instructions, but then we'll just work through, they're working on their own draft, but we work through each step together. Or students can complete tasks independently, and you guys know your students, so you know what they're going to be able to handle. And then sometimes I do just like focus on one or two elements. I won't do everything in the entire essay. It might just be one thing that we're really targeting for that particular draft. Benefits of this method are that you are explicitly teaching those writing elements, those pieces of a paragraph, the parts of a paragraph. You can laser focus it. It does encourage metacognition because they've got to think about what every sentence in that essay is doing. And it's interesting how difficult that can be for them. Like, what is this sentence doing? Why is it here? How is it helping, develop my ideas? It does help develop that internal dialogue. And then I love the visual element of it. They can see what is and isn't in their essay just by a quick glance because of the colors. Drawbacks of the method, the biggest one I think is that it's overwhelming. It is teacher-centered, but like I said, I think it's a really good way to start training kids how to look back at their papers and self-critique. The second teacher-centered self-critique method that I use is a rubric analysis. And in this case, again, because I'm a tested subject area, I use the state's rubric for argumentation or for informative writing, depending on what kind of writing we're doing. And what I'll do usually is the students will draft an essay. They'll have the assignment and draft the essay. And then I'll introduce the rubric. If it's an assignment for like my CCB class, we create the rubric instead. Based on the assignment and based on what we know, based on models too. Like we'll use models to try to help us create that rubric if we don't already have a rubric in place. The next step I do is analyze contrasting case essays. And what that means is we look at several models, but they're not all good models. We talk about helping students become better writers by showing them models of good writing. But I found a study last year, I can't remember the authors now, but I found a study last year they had done with elementary school students and found that actually giving students contrasting case essays helped improve their writing more than giving them just the models of the good writing. So that means that you show them, a good essay and maybe one that falls in kind of the middle and then one that's got a lot of issues. And you look at how those essays would score on the rubric. And then based on that, then they look at their paper. And so they've got like an excellent, mediocre, and a poor example. And then they can look at theirs and kind of see, okay, where does mine fall in this, spectrum, and do the self-critique from there. And then after that, again, they can do the questions for peer critiques and do peer critiques, or they can just go straight to the revision plan and work on revising. And this was just an example of a sample rubric that my College Writing 1 class created last year based on the assignment prompt and analyzing a model. It was an essay about, they had to observe a community and draw a conclusion about a community, make an argument about that community. And it's a disaster. Sorry, my handwriting's not that great, but these were the elements that we said an effective essay should have. So we used this then as we looked at the contrasting case models and then as they self-evaluated. When I introduced the rubric, this is I think this is kind of an important step. So when I introduced the rubric, these rubrics are dense and they use all of that technical language. And a lot of students don't know like what in the world they're talking about. So with my students, we took a look at this rubric and I had them like highlight, circle, underline words that they thought were keywords in the rubric. And then we talked about the words that we saw over and over again. And we talked about those keywords. So like, we highlighted in the 4 category the idea of strong. We saw the word strong and smooth and consistent and satisfying and convincing and effective and those kinds of words to get a sense of what a 4 is. And then in the 3, they noticed that word adequate, like it's adequate over and over and over again, which is like, it's going to do. It's like good enough. In the 2 categories, they noticed again and again that the word inconsistent or inadequate, and uneven, ineffective, things like that. With the 1 category, then their conclusion about a 1 was that a 1 is related to the topic, but it's a hot mess. That was what they decided. A 1 would look like. And then in the 0 category, those were like the big things, like, yeah, just make sure you don't do those things. So obviously we did this one close to testing time when we were doing a sample essay, or an essay that was kind of like one of the prompts that they would see on the air test. But I introduced this rubric, we talked through the rubric, and then we looked at those contrasting case models so that students could see what weakly integrated evidence looked like versus smoothly integrated evidence, and then those abstract concepts became concrete because, like, oh yeah, I see what it means now. I see what fully sustained looks like versus somewhat sustained or unevenly developed, so that really did help them understand those concepts better. It's a good method to explicitly teach that domain specific vocabulary and develop the understanding of those writing concepts, and also of assessment materials if they're in a tested area. It does move them toward independent assessment. It's holistic, and it's a little less teacher directed than the highlighting method because the students are kind of left to look at those different elements of their own writing based on that rubric. So on the flip side of that, sometimes that holistic evaluation can be overwhelming. And it is kind of still teacher centered primarily because, someone else is giving them the rubric, but, everything can't always be 100% student centered. So we know that. So speaking of student centered, so there are some methods, even though like some of these self-evaluation methods I've talked about are more teacher-centered, there are some ways that we can do a more student-centered self-critique. And this one's called the reverse outline. I don't really know how great this one would work for like elementary, maybe middle. I don't know about elementary though. I don't have as much experience working with like emerging writers in the elementary school. But the reverse outline is when basically I ask students to outline the main ideas and the evidence after they've written a draft. So instead of the outline first and then we write a draft from the outline, their draft is done and they look at the draft, and there's a couple different ways they can do it. One is look at each paragraph and tell me what that paragraph's doing, how it's doing it, why is it there? And they have to do that for every paragraph. So that they understand why this paper is going together the way it is. Sometimes what I'll have them do is write their thesis statement. Okay, what's the thesis statement for this essay? And then now look at every one of your topic sentences and like copy and paste those topic sentences to create an outline and see if that makes sense. The third way, I just said that one. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was the third one, listing those topic sentences under the thesis statement. The second one there, nesting the evidence under the topic sentences. So that's where that's of specifically a paragraph where, this is what the paragraph is supposed to be about. And then what's the evidence that supports it? That one's really fun because especially my CCP students find out often that their paragraph is about 6 different things actually when they try to oh yeah, this evidence doesn't really nest under here. It doesn't really work. So I've had really, really good responses from having students do this. They kind of hate it because the drawback is that it is kind of time consuming and it's labor intensive. And so they kind of hate it when I make them do it. But at the end of the day, they say oh my gosh, this really helped me think about everything that's in my paper. It really helps them develop that ability to analyze the unity, the coherence, the organization, and makes them think critically about their work and the decisions that they've made about why they've written what they have and where they've put it. So I've had good success from it, even though they kind of hate it at first. So
another go on. I just wanted to add that Tricia King, who teaches 1st and 2nd grades, said, have you given her great ideas for examining the writing rubrics and getting students started critiquing themselves? So even though you're dealing with high school kids, we are making the transfer. So thank you.
Good, good. I mean, I hope so, because I know that even at the elementary level, these kids have standards that they're supposed to meet. And I know, like, my second grader came home with a first draft of a narrative this week, and it was like a pre-assessment. And I was so excited, actually, because all of the qualities that she was supposed to have in her narrative are like the exact same qualities that my CCP writing kids have to have in their narratives. And like, of course, she didn't have like any of them because she hasn't been taught that stuff yet. She was all upset, but I'm like, oh no, this means you have a lot to learn, and that's good. So yeah, I mean, but it's kind of the same way. You know, she could look at her paper and she could look at that like little mini rubric thing and see like, oh yeah, like that's missing. So yeah, that's really cool how that can be used even at that level. So this other one, the second one is reading through the lens of the audience as a student-centered critique. And this I found in a book called Writing on Demand, and it focuses on like word choice and organization and selection of details by asking kids to think about who's writing their essay and why are they writing it. So if they're asked to read as the audience, they have to stop and think about who's your target audience. What are their attitudes and beliefs and values? And what do they already know about the topic? And how does the audience feel about the topic? And knowing those kinds of things, what am I including? Like, I'll have kids come up to me in a conference and be like, well, should I include all this background information? And I'll say, I don't know. Does your audience need to know that? Who's your audience? What do they already know? What do they need to know? And from there, then the students can make their own decisions about what to include. So once they've identified that target audience, then they can analyze after the draft is done, how effectively did I explain like the background information? You know, does my word choice develop an appropriate tone? How is somebody who's reading this going to take it? You know, am I coming at them too hard? Am I being like off-putting? Where do I demonstrate respect for the audience? So those are really good questions to analyze the effect of the writing on someone else. And I think that's kind of a high level thinking kind of skill. And I think it's also really hard when, like, let's be honest, the audience is a computer that's scoring the on-demand writing that we have to do to pass it an air test. I'm sorry, did you hear me roll my eyes on that one?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but anyway, in authentic writing, and we can still try to get students to think about like, okay, well, who would be an audience for this piece if we were going to write this piece? You know, I try to at least come up with some kind of audience that they can imagine. So the benefit again of this is like, it is critical thinking, and it does focus on word choice and tone of voice and organization and things like that. It's independent and develops that sense of ownership and autonomy. And it does help them understand how important it is to be aware of their audience and the fact that their goal is to communicate with someone else. But it can be difficult, like I said, to identify who that target audience is. Okay, so the next one that I'm going to talk about, and I love this one, and I think this is one that can apply to all grade levels, focus growth areas. So I ask all of my students to do this. They pick areas of growth based on what they already know about their own weaknesses. Sometimes their areas of target growth are based on feedback from previous writing assignments, and sometimes it's based on something that we do in class. So for example, we're working on narrative right now in my CCP writing class, and we specifically practiced show, don't tell techniques and where to show versus where to tell. So knowing how to use show, don't tell effectively. That was a specific focus area. Writing engaging introductions and satisfying conclusions was a focus area. Avoiding passive voice. So those were focus areas. So some kids, for their focus growth area for this particular essay, those might be things that they're going to select to really focus on. My one class of CCP students really struggled actually focusing on a single moment and expanding a moment. So for some of them, that was their target growth area or focus growth area, was expanding a single moment. So what happens is they identify these focus growth areas, they write their papers, they turn them in. Then when I grade the papers or provide feedback on the papers, I pay special attention to those areas of focus growth to see how did that student grow in that particular area. And it's nice too, because it's a nice piece of differentiation. Every kid is growing in a different way. Some kids struggle with writing run-on sentences. Other kids are like fragments all over the place. And so instead of everybody working on run-ons and fragments, the kids can self-select what they specifically need to work on. A couple other self-critiquing options, and these are really quick little ones. So a list of pluses and minuses. So look at your paper. What are the things about your essay that you think are good? Like I'll usually do a 3 and 3. What are 3 pluses about your essay? What are 3 minuses? What are 3 things you think are great? What are 3 things you think you need to work on? And then they can take those to peer critique and talk about those, or we can bring those to a conference with me. Find the gem is the second one. Find the gem. And I can't even remember where I first saw this, but asking students, what's the best part of your essay? Where is something in there that's really amazing? And I love to do that when I'm having them share, because I think it's really good to build confidence for them to find something that they're especially proud of. And then finally, that reflective free write, looking back on the paper, just giving them the chance to, from whatever's going on in their head, they can just kind of like let that, I like to call it brain vomit, kind of let that spill out onto the page. So we can also use self-critiquing specifically if we want to edit for that editing stage. And these are just 3 examples. So one is backward reading. So starting at the end of your paper and reading sentence by sentence to check for fragments and run-ons. That works because there's not the logical progression of ideas that sometimes will cause students to miss if there's a fragment, especially, or a run-on. Sentence length analysis, so counting the number of words in a sentence or identifying sentence types. If they notice they have all kinds of short sentences, okay, now we know we need to go back and edit or to revise for that. One of my favorite activities is having students go back and identify, circle every single time they use a form of the verb to be, and then get rid of them, as many of them as they can. And that forces them to choose better verbs and to use active voice. Vague or filler language, find this, I'll give them a list of vague words or filler words, and then they've got to go back through their paper and find them and get rid of them or replace them or what have you. So those are some other self-critiquing little strategies that I've used. In the process, where do you use self-critiquing in the process? So you could use it after the first draft so that they can create questions for peer critiquing, or they can create questions for teacher conferences, or to create their own revision plan. In writing on demand, they recommend using self-critique after a peer critique. I don't know. I wanted to include it in there because it was in a book that's kind of well-known and well-researched, but I don't know. I just like to use it better before the peer critique, because once they've already peer critiqued, they've got stuff that they can revise. So to self-critique after peer critique, I don't know, to me it doesn't work as well, but you could try it for sure. Maybe it will work better for you and your students. Another place you can use it is after a revision or after a final copy even. They can assess what they've learned. And I do have students do this as well. Like after they finish an essay, they have got to do a reflection on what did they learn writing this essay, and specifically highlighting their areas of focused growth. Tell me about what you focused on and how you address those issues in your writing. And also you can have them self-critique or self-evaluate after the grading is done. You could have them reread and paraphrase what your comments and what your feedback was. That is really interesting, because sometimes I think I'm super clear about what I wanted them to understand in my feedback, and then they didn't get it at all. They didn't have a clue. It also forces them to read what we wrote, because you know how sometimes they like chuck it. So that makes them read what we wrote too. Sometimes to respond to teacher comments, like I've sometimes done some back and forth conversation with students after I've given feedback. And that's been interesting to hear like what students' responses are to the things that I've suggested or to the comments I made. And then the last way is creating those focus growth areas for the next essay. So, okay, based on the feedback from this essay, what are you going to focus on for the next one? So if you wanted to create your own materials for self-critiquing, this is kind of the process that I would follow. I would create or select maybe a rubric I'm going to use. I would gather model essays that I could then show to students based on that rubric. I would identify what were my main objectives or what my main objective was, and identifying whatever areas of difficulty the students were having with that particular assignment. And then from there, select which self-critiquing method is going to work best, create that list of tasks, self-critiquing tasks, modify a generic sample. I think, Diane, are you going to share those samples that I had in my conference? Is there a way to share the materials that I put in the conference?
I will have to get to them. I don't have them right now, but I can get them from the high impact conference stuff, and I will put them in our live binder. I'll put this recording in the live binder, and I will put a tab for all the samples as well.
Okay. Because maybe somebody wants to, modify one of those generic samples that I put in there to help. So
I have to write myself a note.
Okay. So, and just FYI, I did a survey of my students to see what helped them revise effectively. And 93% of my students found that peer critiquing was really helpful in revision. 79% felt like doing the highlighting per my instructions helped them revise effectively. And then 65% found that their self-guided self-critique was actually helpful in helping them decide what to revise for their essays. So I was really actually happy to find that. I mean, I thought it was helpful, but it was really nice to see that the students echoed that it was really helpful to do that self-critiquing. It was worth the time, in other words. So that's just my contact information. So yeah, that's about it.
Suzanne, that was phenomenal. Thank you. I think I don't know how else to say this, but I think you need to take your show on the road. I mean, we could have taken so many pieces and parts of that and then just built on it. So thank you. And I know I got asked if I was recording this session because many people couldn't attend tonight. And I'm envisioning that you may be part of some professional development in some districts, because I think we could, again, can pull it apart. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm happy to do I'm happy to do any of that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of different things I could expand on and yeah, I love teaching writing. I love talking about teaching writing, helping teachers become better writing teachers. So yeah, I'm 100% available for any kind of that kind of consultation.
Okay, and I will put, as I said, I'll put all this in the live binder. Once the recording is rendered or whatever it's called, I'll get it and I'll put it in the live binder tomorrow. And then I'll get Suzanne's samples too, and those will be there as well. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? I guess I want to ask Suzanne, how long does it take you to develop all this? Because I know these students haven't been doing this all coming up. You've got them, what, 11th grade is the first grade you get them?
I have 10th graders. I start with 10th graders.
Okay.
And then I have 11th and 12th graders in my CCP writing classes.
So you just like introduce one of your techniques, if for lack of a better word to call it that, and then, work on that one and then do another one. I mean, is it an all year process, or is it 9 weeks and then you just go from there? What's your sort of your timeline?
So usually I do start in the first 9 weeks with the first essay. Well, actually, if I start with narrative writing, I don't usually do the highlighting method hold on. I'm backtracking again. I'm trying to think about, we haven't done a large piece of writing yet this year. So I'm trying to think about what I've done in the past. I guess I have done highlighting with the narrative. So I think I usually start with that because it starts to train them with how to do the self-critique. I generally move to the rubric analysis then when we start to get into the expository writing, because they're in that tested subject and they're going to be, graded on those rubrics and the test. And it depends on the type of writing too. Like I don't use a super big self-evaluation process with every piece of writing necessarily. It just kind of depends on the big pieces of writing. I usually do more self-evaluation, but my students usually will do some kind of self-evaluation after a first draft, whether it's to prepare for peer critiquing or a conference with me or just their own revisions. And then they'll do a reflection after they've finished their final copy. We always do those. We always do 2 type of self-evaluations with every like major piece of writing. But I even have them like self-evaluate a free write by picking out the gem or something like that. So
I love those little tidbits that you put in there, like 6 of them, the plus, the minus, the gem. I think I could do that tomorrow if I had a group of kids in front of me. So I appreciate you adding those in too. So anyone else have any other questions or comments for Suzanne while she's here? Again, I can't thank you enough. I know I learned. Suzanne and I met my first year in Sandy Valley. We had brought Rick Wormley in. And so they decided on the first waiver day of the year, Suzanne and I would co-present about what Rick Wormley had to say. And I thought, boy, she understood him a whole lot better than I did. So I appreciate her. And that doesn't mean that a gifted endorsement means you know how to work with gifted kids either. It helps a lot, but she doesn't have that. But boy, does she get gifted. So thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate it.